The high desert sun glared over Salvation Creek like a judgment. Heat rolled off the tracks and wrapped around the waiting platform where Josiah Kent stood alone. He was 40 years old, and already looked older. His shirt clung to his back with sweat, his hat brim sagged with dust, and his eyes, gray as a storm that never came, stared down the line, waiting for the train that might save or ruin him. The wind carried the smell of dry earth and dying grass. Once this town had been green, once his ranch, the Barquet, had thrived under his father's hard hands and steady heart. But the creek that fed his cattle had dried to a memory, and his debts had grown like weeds. Now the only thing left for him to do was gamble on hope. That hope came in the form of a letter, signed simply, Annie. He'd sent the advertisement months ago. Temperate rancher, 40, seeks sturdy woman of good character for partnership in life and labor. Honest work, loyal husband guaranteed. It had cost him his last few dollars, but he'd done it. He'd waited weeks for a reply. Only one letter came back. A short, careful hand, promising to come west and make a life. The train was due today. Josiah rubbed the sweat from his brow and felt the stares of the townsfolk drilling into his back. Mrs. Henrietta Gable, sitting on the porch of the general store, was whispering behind her fan, her face twisted like she'd bitten into something sour. Across the street, Sheriff Brodie lounged against a post, his store crooked, his smirk lazy and cruel. He was Bartholomew Shaw's man, same as half the town. Shaw owned the bank, the saloon, and Brodie's loyalty. Expecting company, Kent, the sheriff called, his voice slick with mockery. Josiah didn't answer. The whistle of the 310 from Denver cut through the air, shrill as a hawk's cry. Steam boiled up, and the locomotive came roaring in like a black dragon breathing fire and dust. The ground shook beneath his boots. He straightened his shoulders, pulled off his hat, and tried to look like a man worth marrying. The train hissed to a stop. A few passengers stepped down, traders, a family with tired faces, a traveling salesman whose suit was too small for him. Josiah's eyes swept the platform. He looked for a woman alone, maybe holding a cheap carpet bag, wearing plain shoes and a nervous smile. No one fit the picture. The conductor called out, all off for Salvation Creek. Disappointment sank in Josiah's chest like a stone. She hadn't come. He'd spent his last dollar on a dream, and now the whole town was watching him fail again. He turned to leave, and then the doorway of the last Pullman car darkened with a shape. A woman stood there, still as a painting, framed by the shadow of the carriage. For a long moment she didn't move, then she stepped down. The crowd went silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. She wore a deep burgundy traveling suit that caught the sunlight, her gloves neat, her boots polished. A small veiled hat sat perfectly on hair that gleamed dark as polished wood, but it wasn't the clothes that stole Josiah's breath. The woman was black. Her presence was like a flame in dry grass, beautiful, dangerous, impossible to ignore. Her skin was the color of coffee, smooth and unbothered by the heat. Her gaze swept across the platform, sharp and intelligent, landing finally on Josiah. He forgot how to breathe. She moved toward him, each step measured, heels tapping on the boards. The sound echoed in the stunned silence. Behind her, a porter staggered under the weight of a massive steel-bound trunk. When she stopped in front of Josiah, she spoke first. Her voice was clear, low, and calm, an accent that didn't belong to the West at all. Mr. Josiah Kent. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. She lifted her veil. I am Ainlise Dubois. I believe you were expecting me, not Annie. Ainlise. The sheriff laughed loud and ugly. Well, I'll be damned, he drawled. Looks like Kent ordered from the wrong catalog. Laughter rippled from porch where Mrs. Gable sat. Josiah's jaw tightened. He turned to Brodie, his voice rough but steady. Sheriff, you'll shut your mouth. This lady is my guest. Quote. He turned back, his face burning. Ma'am, he tipped his hat and reached for her satchel. Welcome to Salvation Creek. Ainlise studied him a heartbeat longer, then gave a single approving nod. Thank you, Mr. Kent. Shall we? Every eye on the street followed as Josiah led her to his wagon. The sound of their footsteps was the only noise in the heavy heat. He helped load her trunk. It took both men to lift it, and they climbed on to the wagon seat. As the mules started the long road out of town, Josiah could still feel the eyes of everyone behind him. He'd wanted a wife. What he got was something else entirely. The road wound through dry canyons, the sky a hard blue. Neither of them spoke for miles. Josiah kept his eyes on the horizon. The woman beside him sat perfectly straight, her gloved hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked at the land like she was studying it, not admiring it. Finally, she spoke. That ridge, she said, pointing toward the north, who owns it? Quote, Bartholomew Shaw, Josiah answered, owns most of what you can see and what you can't, quote, and the man at the station. Sheriff Brody, Shaw's man. She nodded once, then looked toward the dry creek bed that ran beside the road. It's dry, she said. Was that natural? Josiah hesitated. It used to run strong, dried up 2 years ago, right after Shaw bought the land upstream. Convenient, she murmured. He stole a glance at her. Her veil was tucked away now, and sunlight touched her cheekbones like bronze. He wanted to ask 100 questions, but didn't know where to start. Miss Dubois, you may call me Ainlise, she said. Ainlise, he tried, his tongue thick with dust. I think there's been a mistake. The agency, they must have sent the wrong letter. Did you specify a preference? She asked, her tone cool but not unkind. Josiah flushed crimson. No, ma'am. I just this town. It ain't kind to outsiders, Sheriff Brody and Shaw. I am not concerned with easy, Mr. Kent, she said firmly. I am concerned with the terms of our agreement. You offered partnership. I accepted. He gripped the reins tighter. Partnership. I meant marriage. I ain't got much to offer but debt and dry land. This isn't a life for a lady like you. You misunderstand, she said, her eyes never leaving the horizon. I am not here for comfort. I am here for the ranch. The ranch. She turned to him then, and the look in her eyes made his skin prickle. Your land is the only property, Mr. Shaw doesn't yet control. That makes it valuable to both of us. Josiah stared at her. The wind hissed through the dry brush. Why to you? He asked quietly, because she said, her voice soft and sharp all at once. Mr. Shaw took something from me long before he took your water. She looked ahead again. Now, if you'll help me with my trunk when we arrive, Mr. Kent, we can begin. The mules plodded on toward the dying ranch. Behind them, the smoke of Salvation Creek shimmered in the distance. Josiah didn't know who this woman really was or why she'd come, but he knew one thing for certain. Whatever she was here for, it wasn't just to be his bride. The Barquet Ranch sat in a bowl of dust and silence. What had once been proud fences and wide green fields was now a stretch of brittle weeds and empty corrals. The barn leaned like a drunk, and the house, his father's house, hadn't seen a coat of paint in 10 years. Josiah Kent looked at it through new eyes, ashamed. He had wanted to impress her, but seeing the ranch through Ainlisa's calm, measuring gaze made him feel smaller than ever. When the wagon stopped, she climbed down without taking his hand. She walked to the porch, her steps light and precise, her eyes scanning everything as if she were drawing a map in her mind. Solid foundation. She said quietly, stone walls. That's good, good. He asked, confused. For what? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she ran a gloved finger along the porch rail, leaving a streak in the dust. Defensible. She murmured. Josiah frowned. Defensible against what, ma'am? Against Mr. Shaw, she replied, looking up at him with those sharp eyes. You said he owns the creek? That means he owns your water, your cattle, and your future. I've met men like him before. They don't stop until someone stops them. He didn't know what to say. Her words carried the weight of someone who'd seen more than talk. Ma'am, I think you might misunderstand. This ain't a war, it's just bad luck and bad land. Annalisa's lips twitched, not quite a smile. Bad men make bad luck, mister. Kent, you'll see. He led her inside. The air was dry and smelled of old wood and regret. The house had 2 bedrooms, a lean-to kitchen, and a small office cluttered with unpaid bills and yellow deeds. He watched her take it all in without flinching. You can have the main room, he said. It was my parents'. I'll take the cot in the office. Separate rooms, then, she said. That suits me fine. Appearances must remain proper, but practicality comes first. He blinked. Appearances? Our partnership, Mr. Kent, she said. We will post the banns tomorrow. The town must believe we're to be married. Otherwise Shaw's men will act before we're ready. Ready for what? For justice. That night, Josiah lay awake in the small room that smelled of dust and ink. He could hear her moving in the next room, the soft click of latches, the creak of floorboards, the faint metallic sound of something heavy being placed down. He wondered what was in that steel-bound trunk. He wondered who she really was. When the gray light of dawn crept through the cracks, he pushed open his door and stopped short. Ainlise was already awake. She stood at the stove, her traveling suit replaced with a plain dark skirt and a white blouse. Her hair was pulled back neatly. She was brewing coffee. I found your beans, she said without turning. You have 3 days' feed for the mules and 1 week's flour left. After that, you're out of luck. He blinked. You went through my stores. I went through your ledgers, she replied. You propped one up under your desk leg. Mister, Shaw has been charging you 10% compound interest weekly. That is theft, not business. Josiah rubbed his neck. It's his bank. What he says goes. That's a lie men tell when they've given up, she said flatly. She turned and handed him a steaming mug. Drink, we have a long day ahead. Quote, he stared at her. Doing what? Walking your land. I need to see where your property lines meet. Shaw's knowledge is the first weapon. He didn't argue. Somehow arguing with her felt like arguing with a thunderstorm. They set out on foot after sunrise. She moved through the dry brush like she'd been born there, noting every ridge, every fence post, every dried stream. Josiah followed in silence, his confusion growing with every step. At midday, they stopped by the old creek bed, a narrow gash of cracked mud and tumbleweed. This used to run year-round, Josiah said quietly. Then 2 years back, it dried up. She crouched down and dug her fingers into the dirt. There's residue of lime and silt, she said almost to herself. Not natural. Someone dammed it upstream. He stared. You can tell that from dirt. She looked up, her eyes glinting. I can tell a great many things from dirt, mister. Kent, and from men. Before he could ask what she meant, a sound cracked through the air. A single rifle shot echoing off the canyon walls. Josiah froze. Stay here, he said, reaching for the old Winchester hanging across his back. That would be tactically foolish, Annalisa said, drawing something from the folds of her skirt. It gleamed silver in the sun. It was a revolver, sleek, polished, and unlike any he'd seen. Where did you? She cut him off. That was not a warning shot. That was a signal. A voice called from the ridge above. Kent, you down there. Josiah relaxed a little. It's Pete Mulligan, he said. A neighbor, or what passes for one. Then let's see what kind of neighbor he is, she said. Josiah waved him down. Pete was a wiry old man with a goat beard and one cloudy eye. He rode a skinny mule and carried a rifle across his lap. Morning, Kent, he called. Heard the 310 brought you a bride. Whole town's talking, soul. His good eyes shifted to Ainlise. Didn't expect, well, I didn't expect that. Josiah felt heat creep up his neck. This is Miss Dubois, he said. Ma'am, Pete muttered, tipping his hat. Ainlise studied him. "Mr. Mulligan," she said calmly, "how did your wife die?" Pete jerked upright. "What? Quote, your wife 3 years ago. Fever, was it?" Quote, his face darkened. "What's that to you? Did she take the new medicine prescribed by Dr. Jameson?" Pete blinked, startled. "How'd you know that?" "Because she said," her tone quiet but sharp. "I've been following Mr. Shaw for 6 months. That medicine was laced with arsenic, bottled in St. Louis by a company he owns." Pete's mouth fell open. "You're saying he—" "I'm saying," Ainlise interrupted, "that Bartholomew Shaw is a murderer as well as a thief." Josiah stared at her. "Who are you?" She turned to him. "My name is Ainlise Dubois. My father was Henry Dubois of New Orleans. 10 years ago, his business partner, then called Barnaby Leach, burned our offices, murdered my father, and vanished. I followed him here. He calls himself Bartholomew Shaw now, and I intend to end him." Pete crossed himself, "Lord above. I am not a bride," she continued, her voice iron steady. "I am a Pinkerton agent sent to gather proof of Shaw's crimes and bring him to justice." The desert wind whispered through the dry grass. Josiah's heart thudded. "You used me," he said hoarsely. "My advert, my ranch, it was just cover." "Yes," she admitted, "but now you know the truth. You can choose, help me or step aside. Either way, this ends soon." Josiah looked toward the horizon where Shaw's land began, the same land that had stolen his water and his life. He thought of the years of silence, of bending under the weight of a man who never even looked at him. Then he looked back at her. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. She met his eyes. "Fight." That night, the first stars flickered over the valley as the three of them, Josiah, Ainlise, and old Pete, sat around a table lit by a single oil lamp. The steel trunk was open now. It was not full of dresses. Inside were files, ledgers, and 2 more revolvers. Ainlise spread papers across the table. "Shaw's money moves through his bank. He's been charging illegal interest, stealing land, and poisoning anyone who gets in his way. I have proof, but to make it stick, we need witnesses. The town fears him. We must show them they're not alone." Quote, Pete spat into a tin cup. "That'll take more than talk. Then we'll give them something they can't ignore," Annalie said. Outside, a coyote howled across the barren fields. Josiah looked at the woman who'd stepped off that train and turned his world inside out. He'd wanted a wife. What he'd gotten was a storm. And as the lamp flickered in the stillness, he had no idea that by sunrise the fire they were about to start. And as the lamp flickered in the stillness, he had no idea that by sunrise the fire they were about to start would light the whole town. The next morning, Salvation Creek woke to sound of smoke and fear. The Barkay Ranch was burning. The flames clawed at the sky, bright against the pale dawn. Josiah whipped the mules hard, the wagon rattling as he and Ainlise raced toward the rising fire. The barn was already gone, nothing but a roaring skeleton of beams and sparks. The smell of burning hay mixed with the dry heat, choking the air. Josiah's heart pounded. It wasn't just wood burning. It was his father's years, his memories, his hope. "No," he muttered, jumping from the wagon. "No." He ran toward the barn, but a bullet wed past his head and splintered the gate post. "Down," Annalisa shouted. She pulled him by the arm behind the wagon, just as another shot cracked. The house, his house, was under attack. "It's the Frank brothers," Josiah said, breathless. "Shaw's men." "Good," Anasa said coldly. "I was tired of waiting." She opened her leather satchel. Inside, beside her polished revolver, lay a bundle of dynamite. She struck a match with steady fingers. Her eyes calm as stone. Josiah's mouth fell open. "What are you doing?" Quote, "Saving your home," she said. "Start yelling, yelling. Make them think you're desperate. Keep them talking." He gulped, peeked over the wagon edge, and shouted toward the porch. "You cowards, come face me like men." Laughter echoed back. "We don't need to." One of the brothers called. "Shaw says, we just light it all and let the desert clean up what's left." Quote, while Josiah shouted, Anna slipped low and silent into the gully behind the house. She moved like smoke, clutching the dynamite, Seconds later, the world shook. A deep boom rolled through the ground, and the porch of the house jumped into the air. Splinters rained down. Josiah ducked as dust and debris filled the air. From the wreckage, one of the Frank brothers stumbled out, coughing, blood on his face. The other didn't come out at all. Then, through the settling smoke, Ainlise Dubois stepped out of the doorway. Her blouse was torn, her face streaked with soot, but she looked unbreakable. The Schofield revolver glinted in her hand, steady as a clock. She dragged the wounded outlaw by the collar and dropped him in the dirt. "Mr. Frank," she said, her voice cutting like a knife, "you have a choice. Talk or follow your brother." He lifted his hands, trembling. "Don't shoot, please. It was Shaw. He said to burn it all, make it look like an accident." Pete Mulligan appeared on the ridge. Rifle in hand, "Got your back, Josiah," he shouted, and Elise nodded toward the house. "Tie him up. He's worth more alive than dead." Quote, by sunset, the barn was ashes, but the house stood. The Frank brothers were locked in the root cellar, moaning and coughing. On the kitchen table lay Shaw's hidden ledgers, thick with secrets. Ainlise flipped through them, her fingers quick. "Here," she said, pointing to a page, "bribes to territorial judge, payments to Brodie, proof of poisoning medicine shipments from St. Louis, everything." Josiah leaned over her shoulder. "So, we take it to the marshal." She shook her head. "No time. Shaw, call your debt for noon tomorrow. If we ride to Denver, he'll destroy what's left of the evidence and the town. We end this here." Pete frowned. "You mean to fight him? I mean to expose him," she said in front of everyone. That night, the three of them made a plan under the dim lantern light. Josiah would go to town in the morning, pretending to beg for mercy. Ainlise would gather the town's folk. Pete would spread the word quietly. When dawn broke, the air in Salvation Creek felt heavy, like the moment before a storm. At 11:00, Josiah rode into town alone on his lame mare, covered in soot and dust. He looked like a broken man. He walked into the Salvation Savings and Trust. Shaw sat behind his desk, his gold watch chain gleaming. Sheriff Brodie lounging nearby. "Mr. Kent," Shaw said smoothly, "so sorry to hear about your accident." "You did this," Josiah rasped. Shaw smiled. "You should be grateful. I'm offering you a chance to walk away. Sign over the ranch, and I'll forgive your debt. Otherwise, Brodie here will see you spend the rest of your days behind bars." "Please," Josiah said, voice low, "just give me time." Shaw's smile widened. "Time is a luxury you can't afford, Mr. Kent. Come back at noon and sign." Josiah nodded and shuffled out, head down. Across the street, the church bell began to ring. Brodie frowned. "It ain't Sunday." Shaw went to the window and froze. The church was full, half the town packed inside. At the front, behind the pulpit, stood Ainlise Dubois. "What in blazes?" Shaw growled. He stormed out, Braddy at his heels. They burst through the church doors, their boots echoing on the wood. "This is trespassing," Shaw shouted. "I own this town." Ainlise's voice cut through his rage, calm and commanding. "No, Mr. Shaw, you stole this town. And now everyone will hear how." She opened a ledger. "Mr. Coleman, your son lost his land in a poker game with Sheriff Brodie." "Yes, a game where the deck was marked. This ledger shows the payment Shaw gave Brodie the next morning. $500 for services rendered." Brodie went pale, the townsfolk murmured. "Mrs. Gable," Annalie said, "you pay rent to Mr. Shaw. He raised it 3-fold, claiming higher taxes. But this ledger shows he hasn't paid a cent of tax in 3 years." The murmurs turned into angry whispers. "You lie." Shaw shouted. "You're nothing but a conwoman." Ainlise met his eyes. "My name is Ainlise Dubois. I am a Pinkerton agent, and this ledger holds proof that you, once known as Barnaby Leach, murdered my father in New Orleans and stole his fortune." The church fell silent. Shaw's face drained of color. "Brodie," he screamed. "Shooter." The sheriff froze. The crowd turned toward him, faces hard. Pete Mulligan stood in the choir loft, his rifle trained on Brody's chest. Brody swallowed. I can't, boss." At that moment, a voice came from the vestry. "That's because this town is under new jurisdiction." A tall man stepped out, coat dusted, a star pinned to his chest. "U.S. Marshal Gregory Pike," he said, holding up a warrant. "Bartholomew Shaw, alias Barnaby Leach. You're under arrest for murder and fraud. Sheriff Brody for aiding a fugitive." The color drained completely from Shaw's face. You set me up," he screamed at Annalise. "No," she said, her voice cold and even. "You set yourself up years ago." Shaw lunged. Josiah stepped forward and met him with the butt of his Winchester. The thud of wood on bone echoed through the church. Shaw dropped like a sack of grain. When it was over, the townsfolk erupted, not with cheers, but with relief. For the first time, the air in Salvation Creek felt clean. A week later, the train waited at the platform, hissing gently in the morning sun. Shaw and Brody were already long gone, shackled on a prison train heading east. Ainleye stood beside her heavy trunk, dressed again in a fine traveling suit, deep blue this time. Josiah stood beside her, clean-shaven, wearing a new shirt from Mr. Coleman's store. "The creek's running again," he said softly. "The ranch is coming back to life." She smiled faintly. "Good. Then my work here is done. You could stay," he said quietly. "The Barquet could use someone like you. I could use someone like you." She looked at him then, her eyes softer than he'd ever seen. "You are a good man, Josiah Kent. Brave, honest, and stubborn. But my work isn't over. There are more towns like this, more men like Shaw." He nodded, throat tight. "Then I reckon you'll need a partner." She tilted her head. "The Pinkertons aren't ready for that, but I am." She stepped onto the train. He hesitated, then grabbed the steel-bound trunk and heaved it up after her. The conductor blinked. "Is he with you, ma'am?" Annalise smiled. "He is now." Quote. As the train began to move, Josiah looked out over Salvation Creek, the town that had taken everything from him and somehow given it all back. He turned to Ainlise. "Where to first, partner?" She smiled, eyes bright with fire and promise. "Wherever there's a man who thinks he's too powerful to fall." The whistle blew. The train rolled on toward the horizon, carrying with it a rancher who'd lost everything and a woman who taught him what courage truly meant. Together, they left behind the dust and rode into the dawn.